So before episode 98 begins, I just need to throw right here at the beginning, time is running out. You need to get your submission in for the 2017 House of EdTech App Smackdown in by Friday, December 1st, 2017. This episode is dropping here on November 26th, so you have less than a week to get your submission in. So get it in by midnight on Friday, December 1st. You can send an email in to feedback@chrisnessy.com, or you can call the House of EdTech hotline at 732-903-4869, or you can go to chrisnessy.com/feedback and you can submit it via SpeakPipe, or you can send it to me via Voxer. And my username on Voxer is Mr. Nessy, MRNESI. Let's start the show.
Hey, I'm Miles, and you're listening to the House of EdTech with my daddy, Chris Nessy.
Support for this episode of the House of EdTech comes from my awesome supporters. If you want to become an awesome supporter, go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nessy. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn. All right, everybody, welcome to episode 98 of the House of EdTech podcast. This episode is going to be all about how to create a podcast. This is part 3 of my recent 3-part series of creating a podcast, whether for your classroom, for your school, for your district. Really, this is something you can apply to any aspect and any type of podcast that you are interested in creating. And again, everything that I'm sharing here is my opinion, but it is well researched and based on my own experiences as a podcaster as I approach episode 100 and 4 years of creating this podcast, which I am super excited about. Let's get started. We're going to have, of course, in this episode, the House of EdTech VIP. I'm going to cover what I think is a good foundation of how to create a podcast, and I've got some feedback and shout outs. So let us dive right in. I have a couple of congratulations to give out. First, congratulations to my listener from Australia. Well, one of my listeners from Australia, as we will find out here shortly, Emma Crofts, at Crofts_Emma on Twitter. She recently added a new bundle of joy to her family, which I interpret as there's a future House of EdTech listener in the world. Also, congratulations to Eric Geis, at GeisGotTechEd on Twitter. Eric is from Pennsylvania, and he also added a second tiny and future podcast listener to his family. So congratulations to Emma and Eric on their new additions. Also, shout out to Paul Ivy, my second that I know of listener from Australia. He sent the following email in through the website. G'day from Australia, longtime listener and lurker in the shadows, but the recent episodes on how and why podcasting have me really motivated to get my own podcast off the ground. I'm an instructional coach, and so I think that will be my angle. I'll keep you posted on how it goes. Thanks for your excellent podcast, inspiration around EdTech, and being an advocate for educator voice. Paul, I am but one man doing the little podcast that could. Thank you for taking the time to send in the email, and please keep us all posted on the launch of your podcast. And if you need anything, obviously you know how to reach out to me, and I am happy to help you. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you do. Let's get into the featured content, which is going to feature some more questions to help get us going. So again, the featured content for this episode is all about how to create a podcast. And I want to start off with some questions that I solicited from the House of EdTech Facebook group. Now, if you're not a member of the House of EdTech Facebook group, I don't know why you're not. Go to chrisnessy.com/Facebook, and I'll be happy to add you to the group. And then you can also submit questions and participate in some discussion that takes place around the podcast. So first up, KC Testerman. She's an assistant principal from Pennsylvania at KC Testerman. And again, all the links to this will be in the show notes, usernames, links, and whatnot over at chrisnessy.com/98. And she asks, how do you cut in the music over and through fluently? Is there a specific way, a program, a tip? Casey, great question. So how do I do it? When I edit the podcast, I use Audacity, and there is a feature inside of Audacity called Auto Duck, which allows me to take, say, the House of EdTech theme song, whether it's the intro, the outro, or if I want to include music underneath what I'm saying, like in the background. In Audacity, there's a effect that you can run called Auto Duck, and what it allows me to do is the program will see the two tracks, because I edited multi-track, so it sees one track with my voice on it, and then I say use this other track that has music, and I want it to auto duck the music. So it will, where it hears my voice above, or any sound above a certain decibel level, it will take the track with the music and automatically lower the volume of that track wherever the volume of my voice or other music or sound effects hits a certain audio level. So I use Audacity's Auto Duck feature to do that. When I am mixing in, say, the music, as you just heard, when my theme song is playing, after I'm done talking, the music is still the music is still going behind my voice. And basically I'm using the fade out feature, specifically the studio fade out, to fade the music out to silence. And that's why the music will play and kind of carry on a little bit after I do the intro, and then I start to talk here in the main part of the episode. And the same thing happens with the transition sound effects when I'm doing between segments. So for example, I will just do this here live in the show. Let's say I was going to transition to another segment. You'll notice that this sound effect fades in and then fades out as I talk. And then I can start to talk, and you would hear a little bit of an overlap of my voice over the sound effect. I do this when I record live on my Windows computer with a free program called Jingle Palette. And it is a soundboard that lets me load up all the different music and sound effects that I might include in an episode. So when I want to play Miles, I can very quickly hear while I'm recording, just say, hey, Miles, what's up?
Hey, I'm Miles.
And I can just, cut that sound effect right there. Or if I was going to play a voicemail message.
You have one new message.
I'm not doing that in post-production. I'm doing that here right now as I record the episode. Which also brings me to, what am I recording into? When I edit the podcast in Audacity, which I will talk about in a little bit. But what I'm recording into right now is a program called Voicemeeter Banana. I've talked about it here on the show before and in some other places. I don't know why it's called Voicemeeter Banana, but the main program is called Voicemeeter. I'm actually looking forward to the update to the program, which should be coming out here by the end of 2017, and it will be named, for reasons I don't know, it's going to be called Voicemeeter Potato. But what Voicemeeter allows me to do, it is a virtual audio mixer. So I have virtual inputs where I can reroute the sound on my Windows computer, which can break it out into multi-track recordings. So when I open it in Audacity, it would allow me to edit each individual track. So my voice right here is on one audio track. Anytime I play a sound effect, that's on another track, etc., etc. So it's really convenient for editing in the multi-track environment. Great question. And a lot of these things are going to come up throughout this episode. But Ms. Testerman, thank you for submitting your question through the Facebook group. Next up, we have a question from, hello, Eric, guys. And Eric asks, what are all the programs that you use to run your podcast? So I have a list here, and I will break it down to what I use and what I use it for. So number one, I use Zencastr.com, and that's zencastr.com, and I use that to record my interviews. Zencastr is web-based, which means when I interview somebody or have a conversation, I don't need to ask them to download any software. They just need to be using the Chrome web browser, and I send them a link. And there are people listening to this right now who are saying, oh, yes, I've used Zencastr with Chris to record conversations. So I've been using it for over a year. It's free, and the free version allows me to record myself and one other person. If you try out Zencastr, you would have a 14-day trial where you could have as many people as you wanted in the recording. Now, the really cool thing about Zencastr is when it's recording through the browser, it's recording each person locally. So while I do record it on my computer, I also record it through Zencastr, and that records me here on my machine. And if I was talking to you, it would record you locally on your machine. Then when I hit stop on the recording, Zencastr, the website, will basically sync everything and give me two separate files that go to my Dropbox.com account, and then I can download them, open them up in Audacity, and now I can edit each of us individually. If you ever want to try it, go to Zencastr.com, sign up, it's free, and all you need to do is send the link to somebody you want to talk to, and then you can get them in on the call. And the nice thing is, it's audio only, so that allows me to talk to people and they can, be in their pajamas, or I could be in my pajamas, and it's not a weird video call. Not that video calls are weird, because in the past I have also used Google Hangouts to record interviews and conversations, as well as Skype. But the nice thing is, with Zencastr, it's audio only, so it doesn't use up a lot of bandwidth, and the audio quality is really good, and a lot of the conversations make it sound like and appear that me and whoever I'm talking to are in the same room, when in fact, we're not. And again, to repeat myself, Audacity is my recording and editing program of choice. It allows me to do everything that I need to do when recording a podcast. I can trim the audio, I can cut out silences, I can slice it, I can move segments of audio around, I can delete things, and it's very intuitive. I have used GarageBand in a pinch when I've been mobile and doing stuff on my MacBook Pro, when I've been out and about doing some recording. But for me personally, I like Audacity. If you are a GarageBand person and you are comfortable with using GarageBand, by all means, feel free to use GarageBand if you are familiar with and know how to use the tools and add some effects. So, go for it that way. Again, Voicemeeter Banana, that serves as my virtual mixer and allows me here on this machine. I have the microphone I'm talking into. I have that connected via USB across the desk where Caitlin sits, and I'm pointing like you can see me pointing. Oh, the fun I have when I do this. Caitlin's microphone is also plugged into the computer right now because later today, or at some point in the next day or so, here on the break, we're going to record an episode of her podcast, the Lifelong Learning Podcast, which I will be guesting on a upcoming episode. But I can connect two USB microphones that record into separate channels. One of the features I'm looking forward to in Voicemeeter Potato is I will have an additional physical input where I could potentially connect up to 3 physical microphones to my computer and record them into separate tracks. So maybe one episode in 2018, you'll get me, Caitlin, and Miles live on the podcast or something like that. It would just allow me that flexibility here in studio. To tag my audio files, which means where I add the ID3 tags or the metadata to my audio files that I record, I use a program called MP3 Tag, which allows me to add things like the title, the artist, each episode's artwork. So you'll notice if you're listening to this podcast in Overcast, for example, you're seeing custom artwork that's different from my regular artwork that you'll see for the artwork for the podcast. If you're listening on most anything other than Overcast, you're not going to see it. And that's okay. It's just a little bit extra that I put in for that visual experience. If you're listening on the Apple Podcast app, you are just probably seeing the House of EdTech cover art that's blue with the red and chrisnessy.com at the bottom. But if you're on Overcast, you should notice you can see it's white background. You see the name of the podcast. You see the title of this particular episode. And at the bottom, you will see chrisnessy.com/98 as the specific URL where you can get the show notes and everything for this episode. There is an ID3 editor for Mac. It's called ID3 Editor for Mac, and I will include a link to that in the show notes for this episode. But the other thing that you can use, if you have desktop iTunes, whether you're on Mac or on Windows, you can use iTunes to tag your MP3 files that you potentially record for a podcast, and you can add your show art, and you do that by right-clicking on a podcast episode and do get info, and you just fill in all that info, all that metadata that you would normally plug in for, say, a music file from a traditional artist. You would just put information about you and your podcast. Now for show notes, what I'm looking at right now on one of my monitors is the website workflowy.com. And workflowy.com is a list creation tool. It allows me to create a bulleted list. And it's super easy to use. I can copy and paste from other programs. So if somebody sends me an email, like Paul Ivy, who did it at the top of this episode, I just copied and pasted from my inbox over here to put it all into the show notes. So it's just very convenient. URLs show up. You can tag things with hashtags within your lists. So if you have a lot of lists going, you can organize them using hashtags, and you can share with other users, and it's free. So actually, I've mentioned this before. It was a House of EdTech recommendation earlier in 2017. So if you haven't checked it out and you're interested, you can go over to chrisnessy.com/workflowy, and that's WORKFLOWY, chrisnessy.com/workflowy, and you can try it out, and it's awesome. It's really convenient. I can also use it on my phone. I use it on my iPad, so I can be adding to upcoming shows notes on the go. And it also allows me to cleanly copy and paste things from here over to my website where I build, again, something like chrisnessy.com/98. It allows me to quickly and easily build my show notes pages. So it's very cool. Photoshop is my go-to graphics program, and I've been using Photoshop for over 20 years, and I use it to do all my own custom artwork, graphics for the website. Anybody who really knows me, that you're listening right now, I am a Photoshop junkie. I am self-taught, over 20 years of experience using Photoshop, and if you ever need graphics or anything, please let me know. I'm happy to help you out and work something out with you. But Photoshop is my go-to here on my Windows machine. If I'm on the go and I need to do something in a pinch, I like to use Pixlr.com, Pixlr.com, and that does work well in a pinch. My website, and every podcast should have some type of website where you can send people. It's kind of like your home base. And my website now, I use self-hosted WordPress, which means I pay for web hosting, which I do so through domain.com. So the web hosting I have allows me to install the free version of WordPress, which allows me to host it myself. Now you might be thinking, wait, I use WordPress.com. WordPress.com is a version, albeit watered down, of WordPress. WordPress.org and self-hosted is something that gives you a lot of control over your website. So as a podcaster and content creator, this gives me the tools that I need to create a website that gives you what you need when you go to it. So plugins and different add-ons that I can give more functionality to my website. Self-hosted WordPress allows me to do that. So for example, whenever I say chrisnessy.com/ and you fill in an episode number, if I say domains or chrisnessy.com/awesome, those are something called pretty links. So there's a plugin I have called Pretty Link Lite. It allows me to set up these nice, neat, clean URLs that get directed to longer, more convoluted URLs that I would not want to say out loud. So if I say chrisnessy.com/98, it goes to the show notes for this episode. If I say chrisnessy.com/awesome, it goes to my Patreon page where you could consider becoming an awesome supporter of the show. And you'll hear me from time to time say chrisnessy.com/ fill in the blank. And it's because there is a longer URL that's out there that I'm not going to say out loud. And I just want to get it in your head that, okay, if I just remember chrisnessy.com/Facebook, I can get to his Facebook group page and I don't have to go to Facebook and search for the House of EdTech. what else do I use for the show? So I also use Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and that's for promoting and building community around the show. Obviously, I'm at Mr. Nessie on Twitter, and this year in 2017, I also started at House of EdTech. I also have at House of EdTech on Instagram, and of course, the Facebook group. So if you're not connected with me in those places, now you know where you can connect with me on the various social media platforms that I'm trying to take advantage of. With that, thank you, Eric, for your question, and that's a lengthy run-through of the programs that I use and briefly how I use them for this podcast. Wiley Brazer, he asks, where can I find various effects and copyright-free music? Students that he's going to be working with will be doing video as well, and so they'll need copyright-free still and video backgrounds. So Wiley had connected with me on Voxer and sent me a couple questions, and I wanted to include this one here, specifically for the audio. And there's two places that I get audio from. First is the YouTube music library, which I will link to in the show notes, and it has a lot of copyright-free and royalty-free music where you just have to give attribution where required. So it's podcast-safe and YouTube video-safe music. The second is audioblocks.com, and that is pay, and that's a la carte. You need a sound effect, you can get a sound effect, or you can sign up for a premium membership and have access to more of their library, but that is on audioblocks.com. And next up, we have a little audio feedback from Eric Meyer, so take it away, Eric.
Hey, Chris, Eric Meyer here. Just finished listening to your second podcast on why you should podcast. So enjoyed the episode. I don't remember you ever getting to, you had mentioned something about why you wouldn't want to buy a Snowball microphone. I had a family member purchase one of those for me. I really haven't used it, but I was kind of curious your rationale, why, and I don't know if you're going to get to that in the third installment. But I guess I did have another question, and you had mentioned sending in some questions. I think I'd mentioned last time I chimed in that I'm a phys ed teacher, and I am interested in podcasting. I've tried a podcast a number of years ago. You know, my audience I was trying to do it for kids, and then realized the kids don't really listen to podcasts, elementary school kids. So I guess my initial thought was, I don't know if you've listened to the Global Voxcast that's put out by Jorge Rodriguez. I was kind of in on the planning and design of that podcast, and I've been involved in some of the interviews, but we specifically use the Voxer app to interview people, and then Jorge takes all the audio and edits it and then puts it out for the podcast. So we don't use like podcasting software, and so we use the app. So it's kind of unique in that way. But my initial thought was to do a podcast on, I was going to call it PE stories, thinking a little bit about origin stories. Like I'm always interested in how things came to be, whether it's in phys ed or not. Part of it was, since there are so many great phys ed teachers out there that are on Twitter and Voxer, I thought about doing like an interview type podcast to try to figure out, what led them to where they were today. What was the path? Because I know not all of us grow up wanting to do what we wind up choosing to do for a profession. Some of us do. They know, like I know my friend Kevin Tiller knew right from the get-go he wanted to be a PE teacher, but some of us did other things before we got in to the profession. But, there are so many other things that I like that aren't necessarily just about origin stories. So my biggest reason for not getting out there was, a little bit of not knowing how to do the interview and record that. I didn't want it to be all over the place, not as specific. The niche would hopefully be phys ed teachers. I think that would be my goal, but I just really can't narrow down what the heck I'd want to talk about all the time. So that's kind of kept me on the sidelines. So I don't know if you can speak to any of that. And I know it's the day before Thanksgiving, so no rush whatsoever on getting back to me, because I know you're busy with your kids and everything. So, but thanks again for your podcast. Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, and hopefully I'll talk to you soon.
All right, Eric, there is no time like the present to address your Vox. So I thought, hey, why don't I just do it on the show? Because there's a lot to unpack and answer in there. As I took some notes on the Vox, again, first with the Snowball, the Snowball is a perfectly good microphone. My only problem with it is that it is a condenser microphone, and if used in the wrong environment and spoken into incorrectly, you're not going to be happy, and people won't be happy with the sound that comes out of it. So could you certainly set it up and use it, in your home? Absolutely. You just want to make sure that you're not in a room that is, hardwood flooring, no furniture, and there's nothing to kind of deflect some of that sound. And you're going to want to make sure you use good microphone technique when addressing the microphone. You wouldn't want to be too far away from the microphone, because the further away you are, the more room noise it will pick up. So you'd want to be more on top of it. And you figure this out by doing some test recordings, not complete episodes, but, counting to 10 or saying the alphabet or, singing a song or reciting a poem, for, 10, 15 seconds, and seeing where you want to be on the microphone and try it in different places in the room you want to record in. So that's really my only thing with, say, the Snowball or the Blue Yeti. If they're used correctly, they're good microphones. No doubt about it. The dynamic microphones, like the one I'm talking into right now, the HoET098, is just a little more forgiving in terms of room noise, and I'm close to it right now, and I'm using good microphone technique, and it's not picking up anything else. If I move the microphone away from my mouth right now, you wouldn't hear what I'm saying because I'm not directly addressing the microphone. I mean, if you have one, take it out, plug it in, use it, see if it works for you. If you find you don't like the way your voice sounds on it or things like that, then by all means, make a change, and I'll be more than happy to help you. And of course, I would start recommending either the ATR2100 or the AT2005. One of the other things that you said, and I'm going to say, hey, don't give up on kids as listeners of podcasts. If you want to create a podcast for them to listen to, I would recommend you check out other podcasts that are geared towards young listeners. And if you wanted to model or emulate that, or use a similar format to bring the content you want to bring to students and young people, go for it. I do believe that children do listen to podcasts. I mean, they're not going to be listening to the same things that we listen to, but go into the kids and family, and I'm sure you will find things that are appropriate. Of course, there are, kid podcasters. There are kids creating podcasts, really good podcasts. So don't give up on kids as listeners. The Global Voxcast, of course I have listened to it, but recording a podcast completely using Voxer, I mean, they do it. They do a nice job with it. In the run of this show, one of the episodes as I record this, the 98th, there's one episode where I did a brief back and forth with somebody where I had them going back. I believe it was, actually, you know what? I believe it was Brent Warner, where I don't even remember the episode, where we were going back and forth about something, and we went back and forth on Voxer. I was at school during the day, and he didn't have the ability, I didn't have the ability to, actually talk onto Voxer. So I was typing him questions, and he was speaking the answers back. And after the fact, I took his audio responses and used the typed words that I said as a script to then record myself after the fact, and I stitched that all together. I don't know if anybody could tell. Nobody has ever still said anything. That would just be a lot of work to, download all those clips, assemble them. That's where I would definitely say, if you can get on something like Zencaster, or you have a way or a program to record Skype calls, do that, where you can actually talk with the person and everything is all in sync. As for your podcast for PE stories, I'm going to go to my default and say, hey, just hit record. Go through the process of recording maybe 5 episodes. You never have to release them, and you may find it's easy. You may find it's difficult. And even if it's difficult, then you can make tweaks. You can listen back and you can say to yourself, oh, this is where, we got off topic and I wasn't able to bring the conversation back to where I wanted it to go. And that comes with practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But if you never start, you never start. So, of course, I'm going to say just hit record and get started, and you will learn and grow. And every episode that you produce will be subsequently better than the episodes that came before it. So that takes care of all the listener questions that I got through Facebook and also through Voxer. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions. And now let's get on to the meat of this episode in what I'm saying is the 8-step process for creating a podcast. All right, so my featured content for this episode is the 8-step process for creating a podcast. So here are the 8 steps. Number 1, surprise, press record. Number 2, edit. Number 3, export your file as an MP3. Number 4, tag your MP3 file. Number 5, upload to your media host. Number 6, schedule your podcast release. Number 7, publish it. Number 8, submit your podcast to the podcast directories. So let's break this down. And a lot of this is stuff that would be ongoing as you continue to create your podcast, but some of these are things that you need to do right up front to just start your podcast. So here we go. Number 1, just press record. I don't care what program you use, Audacity, GarageBand, Sound Booth, Sony Vegas, I don't care. If you've got a program that will allow you to record sound, just press record. It's that simple. You cannot start a podcast if you do not press record. If you don't want to do it alone, find a friend. If you do not have a friend, get a friend. If you cannot find a friend or get a friend, then you need to find a podcast to listen to about making friends. But I'm sure that you can, at the very least, just hit record. You never have to release any audio you don't want to for the world to hear. I didn't do any test episodes. I just started recording, back in the end of December 2013 into January 2014. And, here we go. Could I have benefited from doing some test episodes? Maybe, because I was really nervous in that first episode. And if I could go back, I would re-record it. I wonder what that would sound like if I actually did. But anyway, just hit record. You have to record. You don't record anything, you can proceed no further on this list. Number 2, edit. Editing can be something that is very tedious, very time consuming. And when you first start out, it is going to be tedious and time consuming. You're going to very quickly find some of your verbal crutches, whether it's ums, uhs, likes, and awkward silences, which all of that I left unedited. But editing can also be very simple if you develop a workflow and a set procedure of what you're going to do to process your audio. So before you even take out ums and uhs and likes, what I like to do is I like to run a little post-processing on my raw audio. And I record in WAV, which is the purest recording you can get, and that is independent of whatever system or operating system you are working on. So my post-processing workflow is as follows. I EQ my audio, which means I run some equalization on it. I amplify my audio. Then I add some compression to my audio. Then I amplify it again. And then I run a noise gate. So what are these things? First, when I EQ audio, that means I'm looking at the different bands and frequencies in the audio, and I am tweaking it. So that might bring the highs in my voice, give it a little boost, and I might cut out some of the low bassy frequencies that exist in audio that just aren't recorded. So that removes some blank empty data from the audio recording. Then amplifying it, I'm raising the volume uniformly across the board just so you can hear it. And if I actually released, and I never will, but if I released un-EQ'd audio, it would be very low and very, very basic, and it would really sound different than what you hear from me here on the podcast. Compression, I do this very, very lightly because you can go, a little compression goes a long way. And what compression does to your audio is it will make the lower parts louder, and it will make the really loud parts a little lower in volume, but it doesn't make parts where, say, you're whispering, it's not going to overpower your yelling. So it still will sound, when you whisper, it sounds like you're whispering. When you're shouting, it's not going to, peak and clip and, sound distorted. So compression kind of brings everything a little bit closer to the middle, but you can still get across inflection and silence and excitement. Then again, I amplify it. So again, that raises the volume up after it's been lowered or raised in certain spots. And then a noise gate, when I run that on my audio, it will basically, like you open and shut a gate or a water faucet. When the gate is closed, nothing gets through. When the gate is opened, stuff gets through. So when we apply this concept to sound, if I close the gate, no sound gets through unless it's above a certain volume level or decibel level. So when I'm speaking, that's clearly going to let sound through the gate. When I'm not talking, and if I was silent right now and say I was clicking my pen or typing, I'm talking, and you could probably hear this pen clicking, but then when I stop talking, you can't hear the pen clicking because the clicking of the pen is not loud enough to register sound through my noise gate. And I do that partially through Voicemeeter Banana, but then I process it again in Audacity. And what I do in Audacity is I've set up the ability to edit chains. And a chain is like a macro, so it's like a little process where I've chosen the order that I want to run these things in, the settings for each of these effects that's going to run on the audio, and then I just have to highlight the audio, and it runs in this order: EQ, amplify, compression, amplify, and then it finishes with the noise gate. And that's the editing that I do on my file. If you need more help with this or more of an explanation, please reach out. I'm happy to get on a Google Hangout or, do what I can to support you as you want to launch your podcast. Number 3, after I've edited and I've, run the processing and now I've trimmed out the ums, the uhs, and I've maybe added in any other extra sound effects that I didn't do when I was recording it, and I am ready to export my edited file, it's time to export this WAV file or whatever I've recorded as an MP3 file. Now, the settings I use when I record, most programs you record in, you're going to be recording in 44/100 hertz. I'm going to be honest, I don't entirely know what that means. All I know is it's a default, and it's kind of what everybody else records in. This, I believe, is the difference between when you record and you sound like you, or it sounds really slow, or it sounds like you talk like a chipmunk. So I think it has to do with the speed at which the recording is captured. I could be wrong, but all I know is I record at 44/100 hertz. When I export, I'm exporting my files at 64 kilobits per second mono. Some people that you listen to may release their episodes, and actually they may not even know what they're releasing at, but I make the conscious effort to release my episodes at 64 kilobits per second mono with a constant bit rate. Other people and other podcasts you might listen to might be releasing their podcast in stereo, which might be 128 kilobits per second, or they might be releasing it at a higher bit rate. It is just my opinion, and I share the opinion of other people who have been podcasting longer and better than I have, that for the spoken word podcast such as this, and again, I'm not making, a Hollywood soundtrack here. This is not an orchestra piece. It's just my voice. 64 kilobit mono. Anything lower might sound garbled. Anything higher, it's not necessary. And the constant bit rate, that just keeps it where there's no fluctuation in file size. It's just straight constant bit rate. So again, these are settings that I use in Audacity when I export as an MP3 file. After I've exported an MP3 file, I move on to step 4, and that is to tag my MP3 files. Again, I'm on a Windows machine, so I use a program called MP3 Tag, and tagging my MP3 files is an important step, as this will make the MP3 file I just exported stand alone as a file, meaning that there is some information that could be lost when I'm exporting it that I kind of put back in. So the title of the podcast, the artist, that's me, Christopher J. Nessie, the title of the episode number, and also embedding episode level art. So again, if you're listening on Overcast and you see the white background of this episode and it says episode 98 and there's a link in the title of the episode, that image is embedded right inside the audio file because I did it as an image tag. There's debate amongst podcasters if this is even entirely necessary. A lot of this is done from when podcasting started in 2003 and 2004, when people were, manually downloading files and putting them onto their MP3 players or their iPods, and the data would be there because there was no sophisticated podcasting app on these devices, or if you just had an MP3 player from, not an iPod, these tags in the files would be read and they would display on your MP3 player. So if you do this, it's not entirely necessary. I do it just because that's what I learned to do and it's part of my workflow. The important information to include in your tagging process would be the title, your name, the podcast name, a one-sentence description of the episode, and of course, the artwork. Next up, number 5, upload to your media host. Very simply, a media host is where your MP3 file will live as long as you are, paying for it. And I say pay for it because it is very tough to find a good and or reliable free podcast hosting solution. There will be trade-offs if you have a free podcast host. The podcast host that I use is Libsyn.com, and that's Libsyn. You can use the promo code NESI, NESI, to get your first month free. But I don't tell you that because I want to make money. I tell you that because Libsyn has been around since 2004. They are the largest podcast media hosting company. All they host is audio or video files for podcasters. So that's what I use. When I first started this podcast, I used Google Drive, and that lasted, I think, 10 months because the show started to grow and people, you might have been one of them, reached out and said, hey, I can't get your latest episode. I know you released it. I see it on the website, but I can't download it because Google wouldn't let things get downloaded if too many people either downloaded it or were going back and downloading older episodes. It would just kind of like shut the gate on being able to download stuff. So something like Libsyn lets the podcast be available all the time, 99.999% uptime. If my website goes down, you can still get the House of EdTech because I use their RSS feed to make the show available. I don't pull it through my own website. I wind up actually reposting stuff to the website. And that's how I put the show up there. So if you go to chrisnessie.com and you look at any of the show notes, I'm embedding the player from Libsyn. But if you were to go to houseofedtech.libsyn.com/RSS, you would see a whole bunch of code, but it's that code and that link that I've submitted to iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and any other place that you can get the podcast. It's their URL that I submit because they've been doing it for a lot longer than other companies, and it's a reliable feed. There are other companies out there. You could use Podbean, or you can use Blueberry, or you could use Spreaker, and you can investigate those, but those are other options. Spreaker is actually what I would recommend for you trying podcasting if you're going to do it with students in your class, because you can have one account with Spreaker and you get up to 5 hours of time. They measure it in actual time that you have allotted to your account. So for free with Spreaker, you get 5 hours. And once you get to 5 hours, you would have to remove older content. But the nice thing is you can have multiple shows created under one account. Don't use SoundCloud because they are not a podcast company. Anything that they ever put out, they never mention what they're doing for podcasters. And actually, I'm going to link in the show notes for this episode. I recently appeared on an episode of the Podcasters Roundtable with Dave Jackson, Ray Ortega, and Daniel J. Lewis. And it was all about podcast media hosts. I'm kind of in and out of that episode because I was having some connectivity issues with Google Hangouts. But Daniel, Ray, and Dave go into a lot of good information and share a lot of details about podcast media hosts that will blow your mind if you haven't considered it. But you don't want to be on things like SoundCloud because they don't have your interest as a podcaster in mind. And I will say also specifically, do not use your web host to host your podcast. So things like Squarespace, or even for me, if I'm hosting my website on domain.com, not uploading my MP3 files to my web host. Even if you go to your web host and they say, oh, unlimited file storage, unlimited bandwidth, they're not talking about MP3 files and video files. They're not. It can get you kicked off of these sites and using these services, and they will just cancel your account, and they don't even have to explain why. So hosting on SoundCloud, hosting on your actual web host, not a good idea. Number 6, Scheduling your podcast release date. My advice here, be consistent. The House of EdTech is released every 2 weeks, and it's released on Sundays. Over the last year and a half or so, I've been very consistent with releasing every other Sunday and releasing at 1:30 a.m. It's intentional. When I upload my file to Libsyn and I set the episode to release, I intentionally pick 1:30 a.m. Why? Because not everybody listens on the East Coast of the United States. So for my European listeners, for my Australian listeners, it gives them an opportunity to get it at a reasonable time, and there's no delay. So I will set it up to release at 1:30 in the morning. Why am I consistent? Because, and why should you be consistent? Because as a podcaster, you will become part of people's routines. For example, as you listen to this episode, technically, when I released this episode on November 26th, I released it a week late. The only way you would know that, and thank you, Derek Larson, because you did reach out to me and say, hey, is everything okay? The only way you would know that is if you listened from week to week or from episode to episode. But if you're listening to this episode, in January or February of 2018, all you see is episode 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. You don't know that there was a gap in my release, but there was. Only one person noticed, or only one person reached out. So one of the last things I will say is that by being consistent, people will come to depend on you and when your podcast comes out. For example, I know that there are certain shows I listen to on Monday morning. Dave Jackson, School of Podcasting. Every Monday morning, I know his episode is going to be there when I get in my car. If it wasn't, I would be nervous, and I would wonder if something happened to Dave. Google Teacher Tribe, podcast I produce. Matt and Casey, they want their podcast to come out on Monday morning. Their podcast comes out every Monday morning. So be consistent. It shows your dedication, and it also shows a respect towards your listener. Step number 7, publish your episode. Once you have all your settings correct on your hosting platform and you have double-checked the release date, it's time to actually publish the episode. So after you've even done some test episodes, when you're ready to release what you have to say to the world, you have to publish it. When you publish through your media host, nothing really happens because you haven't taken step 8. And we'll get there in a second, which is submitting that RSS feed to the directories who will display your podcast to the world. So that's very simple. After you create it, you've got to publish it. Now that you've published it, step 8, our final step, you need to submit your podcast to the podcasting directories. So your RSS feed, like a radio station signal, where are you going to submit it to? First and foremost, you need to submit your RSS feed to iTunes. That is the biggest phone book that's out there, the biggest directory of podcasts in the world. So many other apps that people use, whether it's Overcast or Pocket Cast or Thiscast, Upcast, Downcast, Side, whatever you use, most likely, unless it's a dedicated app, which I'll mention a couple of in just a second, they're pulling from the iTunes API. So they're pulling from the iTunes directory. Even if you use the app on, say, an Android device, if it's a iOS or Android application, it's going to pull from the iTunes directory when you search for something. Let me just clear up this myth that I do hear a lot of people say. iTunes does not host your podcast. You don't upload anything to iTunes. When you release it, it becomes like if you were a new subscriber to the show and you went through iTunes, you're subscribed instantly to my RSS feed. So even if, say I release this episode, it doesn't show up right away in the iTunes listing, I know that I'm subscribed to my own show, and people at 1:30 a.m. every other Sunday, they get that episode on their device. It might not show up in iTunes as a listed title and the time and, to see it there. It could take up to 48 hours. So I don't get nervous because I know when I wake up every other Sunday and I see my show, it's released. You can try it. If you get this episode first thing or any podcast and you get it, you see it download and you watch it download to your device, go over to iTunes. If you have a second, you most likely won't see that episode listed right away if it just came out. So I just want to throw that out there. And you want to submit your RSS feed to other apps like Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play Music. those are third-party directories. They don't pull from iTunes. They pull from your RSS feed, so you would get credit for downloads, but they run and maintain their own directories. So to recap, the 8 steps to creating your podcast. Again, number 1, pressing record. Number 2, edit. Number 3, export your file as an MP3. Number 4, tag your MP3. Number 5, upload your podcast to your media host. Number 6, schedule your podcast release date. Number 7, publish that bad boy. And number 8, submit your podcast to the directories that exist out there. Those are really basic, really watered down. If you are truly interested in this, I've given you a very brief overview. The reason I can say that with confidence is I listen to podcasts about podcasting, and on a weekly basis, I am learning new things about podcasting. But if you want to get started, these last 3 episodes are a good place to start. If you're really serious about it and you want to get going, please reach out to me, feedback@chrisnessy.com, send me a direct message on Twitter. You know the ways that you can get in touch with me. If you don't, just go to chrisnessy.com/feedback and let's have a conversation. I can give you more information than this. I would do it more here, but then I'd be turning this podcast into a podcast about podcasting. So episode 96, 97, and 98, this is like podcasting, 100 or just below 101. If you want to take it to a level of doing this, please reach out, and I'm super, super enthusiastic about talking about podcasting, and I'm more than excited to help you start your podcasting journey. And speaking of podcasts, I don't even know if that's even the best transition. The House of EdTech VIP for this episode is Adam Clark. Congratulations, Adam. Adam is a high school social studies teacher from Oxford High School in Oxford, Alabama, where I visited, and actually, I believe I mentioned it a number of episodes ago. Adam is the whole reason I got connected with the teachers and my friends down in Alabama. So, Adam, you're the VIP. Welcome to the club. Adam is also the host of the newly launched Hero Ed podcast. Here's the description of Hero Ed. Hero Ed is a podcast created to help educators become superheroes in their classrooms. We discuss resources, technology, best practices, and mindset that help create a positive classroom culture to help our students soar to heights beyond their dreams. We may even get a little geeky along the way. I'm going to include links to Hero Ed in the show notes for this episode over at chrisnessy.com/98. You need to connect with Adam on Twitter. He is at @ClarkHistory, and that's ACLARKHISTORY. And I thought I would include, for your listening pleasure, a little sample of Hero Ed. Here is the second episode, not the full second episode. This is something Adam called a one-shot, and it's called Save One. Here's a little sample.
Hello and happy Thanksgiving, heroic educators everywhere. Justice League arrived last weekend, and it has already given us as teachers so much to ponder. Save one. Think on that for just a minute and get ready for this Hero Ed one-shot.
It's really cool. You guys seem ready to do battle and stuff, but full transparency, I've never done battle. I've just pushed some people and run away.
Save one.
What?
Save one person.
Which one?
Don't talk, don't fight. Get in, get one out.
And then?
You'll know.
That exchange between Batman and the Flash got me thinking this week. How many times, especially at this busy time of the year when the holidays are coming around and students are often absent for various reasons, field trips, class trips, clubs, sporting events. And by the way, let me take a quick moment to give a shout out to the Oxford High School football team in the third round of the Alabama State High School playoffs. Good luck and go Jackets this weekend. And also you've got final exams that are coming around and you're trying to review and get units completed and assessed. You're just trying to say to yourself, let me make it to Christmas break. Let me tell you, you're not alone in those feelings. It's times like these, a lot of times as teachers, we feel sometimes the least effective because we're just trying to get done and get by, right? Then sometimes you look around at teachers that are still going strong and engaging their students in these valuable learning experiences, sometimes even up until the day before Thanksgiving break. And you say to yourself, I just can't do that. I can't do that. Maybe you're in a situation where you're in a school that seems to be pushing hard for teachers to start innovating and trying new and exciting things. And perhaps you've never really done that. You don't really feel comfortable trying those new things. Just like the flash in this clip. You tell your colleagues, hey, it's great that you guys want to do this, but I don't really do those things. I can't do those things. I teach, I test, I move on.
So that's just a little sample of Hero Ed from Adam Clark. And again, Adam Clark, you are this episode's House of EdTech VIP. So thank you for checking out this episode. I hope you have enjoyed episode 98. I also hope you've gotten value from episodes 96 as well as 97 as I did this little 3-part series on podcasting. It was really fun to do because, again, as I started this, I've been doing this for 4 years, and I never took the time to really tell you guys how I do it and to inspire you, hopefully, to consider doing it for yourself or your school or your students. So, thanks again for checking out this little mini-series. I may do other mini-series in the future on other topics. We'll see what happens. Podcasting is like that. Let's keep the conversation going. Again, if you have questions about podcasting or how to podcast or anything related to education technology, I'm your guy. So go over to chrisnessy.com/98, or you can send a message to me by going to chrisnessy.com/feedback. I would love to chat with you. If you enjoy the House of EdTech, and hey, you got this far, right? And actually, let me just say this. The last episode where I put in the little bit at the end about t-shirts, congratulations to those that are getting a t-shirt. Those t-shirts will be coming, I promise. Just have to get the t-shirts made up and then send them out to you. So I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for those of you that are dedicated listeners who go down literally to the last second of every episode. Now again, if you enjoy the show, do me a favor. Go tell somebody else about the House of EdTech. I mean, you could get me a Christmas present. You could get me a New Year's present. I mean, that would be cool. I'm not going to turn those things away. But the best gift you could give me this holiday season is to share this podcast with somebody else, face to face. Tell them, hey, I'm dropping pens here in the studio. Don't drop pens in your studio. Share the podcast on social media. Use the hashtag House of EdTech. Tag the Twitter account at House of EdTech. If you're on Instagram, take a picture, tag at House of EdTech. Let's get connected. That's what this is all about, connecting. The other thing you can do is you could also become an awesome supporter of the show. Many thanks, and these episodes at this point would not be possible without the support of Jeff Herb, Peggy George, Mark Grindell, Brent Warner, Dan Gallagher, Jen Giffen, and Scott Titmus. All of their support goes a long way. If you're interested, go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. The next episode of the podcast is episode 99, the House of EdTech App Smackdown. Get those entries in by December 1st, and that episode will come out on December 3rd. Until next time, thank you for learning with me, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. The House of EdTech is a proud member of Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here. For more great content, go to voiceed.ca. The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more, go to edupodcastnetwork.com.